Welcome to THEBACK LATURGY. It was in 1826 when a mother found out her 5-year-old son had been illegally sold and taken hundreds of miles away. She possessed no money, no power, no rights. Yet she held something more powerful, a fire that would not be extinguished. Her name was Sojourner Truth, and she was prepared to achieve the impossible. She would become the first black woman in American history to take a white man to court and to win. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below telling us where you're joining from. Each voice that joins us here plays a part in ensuring these forgotten heroes are not lost to history. Now, let her story unfold. In the spring of 1828, within a small courthouse in Kingston, New York, an event occurred that had no precedent in the United States. A black woman, born into slavery, stood before a white judge and demanded her child be returned. She had no money. She could neither read nor write. She had never set foot in a courtroom in her life, and she was prepared to do the impossible. She was prepared to win. Her name was Isabella. The world would later come to know her as Sojourner Truth. But on that day in March of 1828, she was simply a mother fighting for her son, a mother who would not accept that her child had been stolen from her and sold into the deep South, a mother who entered a system built to crush people like her and, against every conceivable odd, emerged victorious. This is her story, the story of the first black woman in American history to sue a white man and win. The Hudson Valley of New York in the late 1700s was a place of contradictions. Along the great river stretched rolling hills and fertile farmland. Dutch and English settlers had established prosperous farms and estates. Small villages centered around churches. And on those farms, in those houses, beside those churches, slavery persisted. Not the vast plantation slavery of the South, but slavery all the same. Families owned other families. Human beings purchased and sold other human beings. Children were separated from their mothers and traded like livestock. Isabella was born into this world around the year 1797. The precise date remains unknown because no one took care to accurately record the births of enslaved children. She was born on the estate of Kolonel Johannes Hardenberg, a wealthy Dutch landowner in Ulster County, in a hilly region the Dutch called Zwartekil, about 95 miles north of New York City. James and Elizabeth Bomfrey were her parents. The name Bomfrey was Dutch, meaning tree. Her father had been given this name due to his tall stature. James and Elizabeth had been captured in Africa and brought to this strange land against their will. They had perhaps 10 or 12 children over the years, though Isabella never knew the exact number. Many of her siblings were sold away before she was old enough to remember them. In the cellar of the Hardenberg estate, in a cold, damp space beneath the main house, James and Elizabeth raised their youngest daughter. There was no bed. There were no windows. The floor was dirt. The walls were stone. When it rained, water seeped in. The only light came from a small opening that led outside. This was home for the first years of Isabella's life. She grew up speaking Dutch. It was the only language her parents knew. It was the only language spoken on the Hardenberg estate. Later, this would cause her immense suffering when she was sold to English-speaking owners who could not understand her and who beat her for not understanding them. In 1806, when Isabella was about 9 years old, Kolonel Hardenberg died. His estate was divided among his heirs, and the enslaved people he owned were sold at auction. Isabella watched as her family was torn apart. She stood on the auction block alongside a flock of sheep and was sold together with the animals for 100. For 100 for a child, the 100 for a human life. Her new owner was John Neely of Kingston, New York. Neely spoke only English. Isabella spoke only Dutch. When she could not understand his commands, he beat her. When she replied in the only language she knew, he beat her again. Years later, she would describe the scars that covered her back from those beatings. She never forgot the pain. She never forgot the helplessness of being a child, alone, unable to communicate, unable to escape the violence that rained down upon her. After about 2 years of this torment, she was sold again. Martinez Shriver of Kingston paid $105 for her. The atmosphere in his tavern was crude and morally questionable, but it was safer than the Neely farm. During her time there, Isabella began to learn English, picking up words and phrases from the customers who came and went. But in 1810, she was sold once more. John Dumont of New Paltz, New York, paid $175 for the 13-year-old girl. She would remain with the Dumont family for the next 16 years. These years would shape everything that followed. John Dumont was not the worst owner Isabella had known. Compared to John Neely, he seemed almost kind. He recognized her intelligence and her capacity for hard work. He sometimes praised her abilities. But his wife, Sally Dumont, was an entirely different matter. Mrs. Dumont seemed to take pleasure in making Isabella's life miserable. She criticized everything Isabella did. She accused her of laziness and incompetence. She made it clear that she considered the enslaved woman beneath contempt. The details of what Isabella suffered at the hands of Mrs. Dumont remain largely hidden. In her later autobiography, dictated to a friend because she never learned to read or write, Isabella spoke only vaguely of the cruelties she endured. Historians have speculated about what she left unsaid. Sexual abuse was common for enslaved women. The constant threat of violence hung over every interaction. Whatever specific torments Isabella experienced, they left deep scars on her soul. Despite the hardships, Isabella found ways to survive. She found comfort in religion, developing a deep and personal relationship with God. She learned to pray, speaking aloud to the divine when she was scared or hurt. This faith would sustain her through everything that was to come. It would give her the courage to do things that seemed impossible. It would convince her that she was not alone, even when everyone and everything seemed to be against her. Around 1815, when Isabella was about 18 years old, she was married to an enslaved man named Thomas. The marriage was arranged by John Dumont, as was common practice. Thomas was older than Isabella and enslaved on the same property. Together they had 5 children over the next decade. Diana, born around 1815. Peter, born around 1821 or 1822. Elizabeth, born around 1823. Sophia, born around 1824, and another child who died in infancy. Isabella loved her children with fierce devotion, but she lived in constant fear. She knew that at any moment any one of them could be sold away from her. She had watched her own siblings disappear. She had heard the stories of mothers who never saw their children again. This fear was the constant companion of every enslaved parent. It was a fear that never went away. Meanwhile, the laws of New York were slowly changing. In 1799, the state had passed a law for the gradual abolition of slavery. Under this law, children born to enslaved mothers after July 4th, 1799 would eventually become free. Boys would be freed at age 28, girls would be freed at age 25. It was a slow process designed to protect the property rights of slaveholders while gradually ending the institution. But for people like Isabella, who had been born before the law was passed, it offered no immediate hope. Then in 1817, a new law was passed. This law set July 4th, 1827, as the date when all remaining slaves in New York would be emancipated. For the first time, Isabella could see an end to her bondage. In 10 years, she would be free. Her children, born after 1799, would also eventually gain their freedom, though they would have to wait until they reached the specified ages. But John Dumont made Isabella a promise that changed everything. He told her that if she worked faithfully and well, he would release her 1 year early on July 4th, 1826. He would give her a cabin and a small plot of land where she could live with her husband Thomas. After all her years of loyal service, she would finally have something of her own. Isabella worked harder than ever. She spun wool. She cooked. She cleaned. She labored in the fields. She did everything Dumont asked and more. She believed his promise. She trusted that he would keep his word. But in the winter of 1825, Isabella suffered a serious injury. She hurt her hand badly, and for weeks she could not work as effectively as before. When July 4th, 1826 arrived and Isabella approached Dumont about his promise, he refused to honor it. He claimed that because of her injured hand, she had not given him the full amount of work she owed. He would not free her until the following year as the law required. Isabella was devastated. She had believed him. She had trusted him. And he had broken his word. Something inside her shifted that day. Something hardened. She had spent her entire life obeying the rules that white people set for her. She had done everything right. And still she had been betrayed. She made a decision. She would not wait another year. She would take her freedom for herself. In the late autumn of 1826, Isabella made her move. She did not run away in the night like a fugitive. She did not sneak off in fear. Instead, she waited until she had spun 100 pounds of wool, completing the work she felt she owed Dumont. Then one morning at dawn, she picked up her infant daughter Sophia and walked away. Years later, she would describe this moment with simple dignity. "I did not run away," she said. "I walked away by daylight." She did not walk far. She had nowhere to go. She had no money, no friends, no resources. But she knew of a family that might help her. Isaac and Maria Van Wagenen were known abolitionists who lived nearby. They did not believe in slavery. Isabella walked to their door and asked for help. The Van Wagenens took her in. When John Dumont came looking for his property, Isaac Van Wagenen made him an offer. He would pay Dumont $20 for Isabella's services until July 4th, 1827, when the Emancipation Law would set her free. Dumont agreed. Isabella was not technically free, but she was safe. She was out of Dumont's house. She was away from his wife's cruelty. And she was only months away from legal freedom. But Isabella had not been able to bring all her children with her. Her older children were bound by their own terms of service to Dumont and other families, and her young son, Peter, about 5 years old, remained behind. This separation tormented her. Every day she thought of him. Every night she prayed for his safety. Then in the autumn of 1826, she learned something that shattered her world. John Dumont had sold Peter. The circumstances of the sale were complicated and horrifying. Dumont had transferred Peter to Dr. Eliza Gedney of Newburgh, New York for 20. Gedney had planned to take the boy to New York City, possibly with the intention of traveling to England. But when those plans fell through, Gedney decided the boy was too young and too much trouble, so he sold Peter to his brother, Solomon Gedney. Solomon Gedney did not want Peter either, so he sold the child again, this time to his brother-in-law, a wealthy plantation owner from Alabama named Fowler. Peter was gone. Sold to the deep south, sold to a cotton plantation 1,000 miles away, sold into a form of slavery that made the Hudson Valley version seem almost gentle by comparison. When Isabella learned what had happened, something inside her broke, and something else caught fire. She knew exactly what this meant. Alabama was not New York. There was no gradual emancipation law in Alabama. There was no July 4th, 1827 waiting for Peter. If her son remained in Alabama, he would be enslaved for the rest of his life. He would work in the cotton fields until he died. He would never see his mother again. He would never know freedom. Isabella's grief was overwhelming. She screamed. She cried. She felt the weight of absolute helplessness crushing her. What could she do? She was one woman. She had no money. She had no power. She could not read or write. How could she possibly fight against wealthy white men who had sold her child like a piece of property? She went to the Dumonts to confront them. She demanded they return her son. They laughed at her. Mrs. Dumont, the woman who had tormented Isabella for years, was particularly cruel. "A fine fuss to make about a little lad O'Keen," she reportedly said. "Why, you have had as many children as you can take care of." But Isabella was not deterred. She went to the Jedneys. She pleaded with them to help her get Peter back. They refused. Solomon Jedney claimed he had done nothing wrong. He said the sale was perfectly legal. He told Isabella to stop making trouble and go away. Isabella should have given up. Everything in her world told her that she had no chance. Black people could not sue white people. Enslaved women could not challenge the property rights of wealthy men. The legal system was not designed for people like her. It was designed to keep people like her in their place. But Isabella had something that her oppressors did not understand. She had faith. Not just faith in God, but faith in herself. Faith that what had been done was wrong. Faith that there must be some way to make it right. She sought help from the Quakers. The Religious Society of Friends, as they were formerly known, had long opposed slavery. Many Quakers actively worked to help enslaved people gain their freedom. Isabella found a group of Quaker abolitionists who listened to her story and were moved by her determination. They told her something extraordinary. They told her that what the Jedneys had done was actually illegal. New York law prohibited the sale of enslaved people out of state for the purpose of keeping them in bondage. Peter had been protected by this law. His sale to Alabama was a crime, and that meant Isabella had grounds to sue. But how does an illiterate, penniless black woman sue a wealthy white family in 1827? How does she navigate a legal system that has never been designed to serve her? How does she find lawyers who will take her case? How does she pay for their services? The Quakers helped her. They pooled their resources. They found lawyers willing to represent her. They explained to Isabella what she needed to do, and they told her to go to the courthouse in Kingston and present her case to the grand jury. Isabella had never been inside a courthouse. She did not know what a grand jury was. She had no formal education, no experience with legal proceedings, no understanding of the complex rules and procedures that governed the courts. But she had her story. She had the truth, and she had her unshakable conviction that her son had been stolen from her. She walked to Kingston. It was the same town where she had been sold as a child with a flock of sheep. It was the same town where she had been beaten for not understanding English. Now she returned as a woman on a mission, not as property, but as a plaintiff. At the courthouse, she asked for the grand jury. Someone directed her to the correct room. She walked in and faced a group of white men who had probably never seen a black woman demand anything from them. And she began to speak. Isabella's voice was powerful. It carried across the room. It demanded attention. In later years, when she became famous as Sojourner Truth, people would describe her voice as deep, guttural, powerful. They would say that when she spoke, everyone listened, whether speaking to a handful of jurors or a crowd of thousands. She had a presence that commanded respect. She told them what had happened. She told them about Peter. She told them about the illegal sale. She told them that her son had been taken from her and sent to Alabama. She told them that she wanted him back. One of the jurors was moved by her testimony. He asked her to step into a private room and tell her story again. There she was asked to swear an oath that Peter was indeed her child. She swore. She was then asked to provide more details about the sale, about the Jedneys, about where Peter had been taken. The wheels of justice began to turn, but they turned slowly. On March 1, 1828, Isabella's lawyers filed a formal legal action. The document was called a writ of habeas corpus. The Latin phrase means, "You have the body." It is one of the oldest and most fundamental legal protections in the English legal system. It requires anyone holding a person in custody to bring that person before a judge and justify the detention. If no lawful reason can be given, the person must be released. Isabella's lawyers argued that Peter was being held unlawfully. They argued that the sale to Alabama violated New York law. They demanded that Solomon Jedney, who had arranged the sale, produce the child before the court. The lawyers who represented Isabella were named Herman M. Roof and John Van Buren. The case was heard by Abraham Broin Hasbrook, a commissioner of the New York Supreme Court. These names may not be famous today, but they should be remembered. They were white men who chose to help a black woman fight for her rights at a time when such help was rare and dangerous. Solomon Jedney received the legal summons and realized he was in serious trouble. The charge was essentially kidnapping. If convicted, he could face criminal penalties. He had not anticipated this outcome. He had assumed that the sale of a black child would go unnoticed and unchallenged. He had assumed that no one would care. He was wrong. Jedney quickly contacted his brother-in-law Fowler in Alabama. He arranged to have Peter sent back to New York. The boy would be produced before the court, and Jedney would claim that nothing illegal had happened. He would deny everything and hope for the best. Peter arrived back in New York sometime in March 1828. He had been in Alabama for nearly a year and a half. He was about 7 years old, and he was not the same child who had been taken from his mother. A hearing was scheduled for March 14, 1828 before Commissioner Hasbrook. Isabella would finally see her son, but what she saw broke her heart. She arrived at the courthouse and waited. The lawyers presented their arguments. Solomon Jedney denied that he had done anything wrong. He claimed that the sale was legitimate, that no laws had been broken, that the whole affair was a misunderstanding. And then they brought Peter in. Isabella looked at her son. She expected him to run to her. She expected him to cry out with joy at seeing his mother. She expected the reunion she had dreamed about for 18 long months. Instead, Peter screamed. He grabbed Solomon Jedney's leg and clung to it. He shouted that Jedney was his master. He said he did not know this woman. He said he had no mother here. He did not want to go with her. Isabella was stunned. What had they done to her child? What had happened in Alabama that made him deny his own mother? The judge noticed something else. Peter had scars. There was a large scar on his forehead. There was another scar on his cheek. The judge asked Peter how he had gotten these wounds. Peter said a horse had kicked him on the forehead. He said he had gotten the scar on his cheek by running into a carriage. The judge was not convinced. He ordered Peter to look at him directly when answering questions, not at Solomon Jedney. He pressed the boy for more details. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. Peter had been brutally abused in Alabama. He had been beaten repeatedly. The scars on his face were not from accidents. They were from violence. And the boy had been so traumatized, so terrified that he had learned to deny his own family and cling to his abusers. It was a survival mechanism. It was the desperate adaptation of a child who had learned that defiance brought pain and submission brought survival. Isabella understood. She did not blame Peter. She saw the fear in his eyes. She saw the way he flinched at sudden movements. She saw what Alabama had done to her son. The judge saw it too. Commissioner Hasbrook listened to all the testimony. He considered the evidence. He looked at the scarred child who had been illegally sold into slavery and brutally abused. And he made his ruling. The words he spoke that day would echo through history. The boy is to be delivered into the hands of his mother. The judge declared, Peter would have no other master, no other controller, no other conductor but his mother. Isabella had won. She was the first black woman in American history to sue a white man for the return of a family member and win. She had done what everyone told her was impossible. She had challenged the system. She had demanded justice. SEEOUANTHE next VO.